right, so today we are in Are You Covenanted, Part 11. Are You Covenanted, Part 11? And as I was looking at the notes last night, I was wondering where I should finally end this at some point, but I'm just going to let it keep going, I guess. All right. Now, as we go through from this point forward, I know we had a kind of our thought before this was seeing how there were covenants between Yahweh and men. There was covenants between men and men. So just the idea of what a covenant was. But now I want us to now focus additionally to that on the role and effect of leadership in covenant keeping. Because we're going to see that play through as the covenant is now supposed to be in place. And with it supposed to be in place, then we can see how they do well with it sometimes and they don't do well with it sometimes, and how that's connected to the role of the leadership and the way the people interact with the leadership. Because sometimes we're going to see that there was very bad leadership. Sometimes it was really good leadership, and it didn't always mean based on the leadership that the people behaved, but generally speaking, the people followed the leadership. When there was a good king, they generally did things right. When there was a bad king, they generally did things wrong. And we're going to see that as we go through the book of Judges into some of the other places. But we're going to see that leadership has an important role here because, as we've talked about almost, ad nauseum here, this whole thing with leadership is what's really messed us up. We don't have an understanding of it. We don't have it in place right. The leadership is doing a bad job. The people are following the leadership poorly, and the whole thing becomes a spiraling into the abyss mess. And we're going to see that very clearly, hopefully, here as we go through the Are You Covenanted, Part 11 here. Now let's begin in Deuteronomy chapter 31. And we're going to go ahead and read a good chunk of this chapter because I like it and I want to. Okay. I really didn't have reason to. No, actually, the word covenant pops up at least 5 times in the chapter as scattered around. So we're going to deal with the idea of covenant here quite a bit. We're going to begin in verse 9. And Mosheh wrote this Torah and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who bore the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, and to all the elders of Israel. You're going to see this consistently at times of establishing or reestablishing the covenant with the people, that it starts with gathering the leaders together and making sure they've got it. Because we're going to see this later on as there becomes a disconnect and they rediscover the Torah scrolls. And what do? They bring the elders and leaders together and they make sure they've got it so that they can then implement it and lead and set the example for everybody else. So Moses does the same thing here. He says, look, he took everything he wrote, he took the written scroll, this Torah, and gave it to the leadership, the priests, the sons of Levi, who bore the ark, and to all the elders of Israel. Who are the elders? So you've got the Melchizedekian, which is the 70 elders, and you've got the Levitical, which is Aaron and his sons. So they're together making sure they've got this Torah thing. But also I like this idea of the word, they bore the ark of the covenant. So these are those who had the responsibility of caring for, carrying, and guarding, and watching over the thing that had in it the covenant. So they had that responsibility. It wasn't individual. And by the way, you never see anywhere from when we get the covenant at Sinai going forward that somehow this becomes a covenant of just individuals where it's all going through directly vertical into individuals. It's always like this. It's given to the leadership then reads it before the people, and all the people say amen, and they go ahead and decide they're going to keep it or not. That's always been the way it's been played out. And we see that right here. So Moses takes that Torah and he gives it to the leadership at the time. And I like this idea that they didn't just carry it. I mean, I know you can think, okay, they picked it up and they carried the Ark of the Covenant. But they had a burden of bearing the Ark. This is a burden of leadership. A responsibility to keep it safe, make sure nothing happens to it, make sure that it's available. Remember also there was a Torah that was written that was kept outside the ark so that they could have access to it. Not because it had anything different in it than the one in the ark. It was just a copy that they had outside the ark so that they could access it without any issues of opening the ark. So they could check and see what it says as they're disseminating that to the people. So very important that leadership has a responsibility. The leadership at this time was who? The elders and the sons of Levi and the priests, and they had the responsibility of bearing the burden of the covenant of the ark. And so I think that's an important concept. When you look at your leadership, do you have leadership that understands and is embracing that burden? Have you found those anointed appointeds? These people are anointed and appointed to bear the ark. And so I think that's an important term that we kind of come to. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, these are the guys that carried it around. It went a lot further than that. I think it was a much deeper meaning, from the Peshat, simple level of, well, they carried it. I think there was a bigger burden there because they were also the ones that had the access to it. The average person can walk over and say, excuse me, I'd like to look at the book for a minute. Can you just let me borrow that? No, you couldn't do that. You couldn't just walk up and say, I'd like to have that scroll for a minute, and I'll bring it back later. You had to go to the priests, the elders, the leaders who had access and say, I had a question about what's in those scrolls. Can you help me? And they bore the burden of that and the responsibility of sharing that information accurately. That's a huge burden to make sure that they were sharing the burden and sharing the information accurately, because guess what? That goes back to that whole idea of a double, curse or the double judgment. The leadership is risking that when they come up and say, this is what I believe it says there, because they're the ones with access. Now, we all have a book now. By the way, that wasn't until only the last couple of, 1,000, 1,500 years that you had a book. Well, not even. Like the 1400s or whenever it was that we finally ended up with a published book. So it's not even been, more than 600, 700 years you've actually had a book in the last 6,000 years that everybody had a copy of. Now you can just get it on your phone. It's free in different apps. You have it on the internet. I mean, you don't even need to spend any money to buy one. When I first came into this, I had to buy a Bible. You don't even have to do that anymore. It's accessible free all over the place. And so there was a burden even greater on them to disseminate the information than now. But you know what? We still have the same burden because you still have questions, because counter to what everybody's saying out there, the Ruach isn't teaching everybody privately. None of you is getting your private lessons where everything is just being revealed and open to you and you have no questions. I'm not saying you don't get any revelation from the Ruach. I'm simply saying is you still have questions, don't you? And so if you have questions, that means the Ruach is not answering all your questions, because that's not the way the system works. It's not the way it was designed. It was designed so that you go to those who bear the burden of the Torah, those who bear the burden of the covenant, and ask for guidance. That's built in. You see it right here. It's built in. Because now look what happens after that. In verse 10, Moses commands them, saying, at the end of the 7 years, which is the Shemitah cycle, at the appointed time, the year of release, at the festival of booths, when all Israel comes to appear before Yahweh your Elohim in the place where he chooses, read this Torah before all Israel in their hearing. So all Israel didn't get access to this on a daily, regular basis like you do. Now, it's not to say that there were not other times during the other 6 years or even the whole 7 years except that moment that they were not being instructed, but they were going to hear the whole thing read at least at the Shemitah, at the year of release. And they were going to do it at Sukkot. And so that's why our tradition has been at Sukkot to read the book of Deuteronomy, which at the minimum is what he's talking about here, because it is a covenantal document. It's the way it's written. It's written in legal language of the ancient Near East as a legal document. And it does give a history that does cover almost everything previous to Deuteronomy in it, in a synopsis, so that you have all the relevant points leading to the covenant, to the understanding of what he expects us to do and what we should expect from him. That's really what the covenant's all about. His expectation of us, our expectation of him. And so it's to be read. So the leadership is to read this in front of the people. Now the people, having heard it, will know if they've been being shared it correctly. See, a lot of you, once you got yourself a Bible and had started reading it yourself and was sitting there in your churches that you used to go to, and all of a sudden you might go, well, wait a minute, it doesn't say what he just said. And so now you start to gain an understanding because you have access. Well, this is to make sure the people had access. They had to read it once every 7 years at the minimum, just to make sure that everybody got to hear it to know whether or not what was going on was in line with the book. So continuing here, verse 12, he says, assemble the people, the men and the women and the little ones, and your sojourner who is within your gates, so that they hear, so that they learn to fear Yahweh your Elohim and to guard, to do all the words of this Torah. So everybody was supposed to hear it so that they would fear. They would learn to fear. This is exactly goes back to Deuteronomy 10:12, when it lays out what does Yahweh want of us. Now, Israel, what is Yahweh asking of you? What? It starts with fear. None of this goes forward unless you have the right awe, reverence, and respect, fear, for the one who's issuing the instructions. The instructions, that's what Torah is. It's simply the teachings and instructions of Yahweh. That's what Torah means. Well, it's translated in all these places as law. Well, it is a law, but not like a law like you think of if you don't do it right, you're going to get arrested, sent to jail, or get a ticket or something. We're talking about understanding how things function, okay? I don't know what you want to call it, law-wise or not, but if I drop this, it's going to fall. There are laws in place that make that happen. It's not going to go sideways. It's not going to go up because of laws. There are laws that make our weather patterns. There are laws that govern all of chemistry, physics, biology. Those are all Torah laws. Yahweh put them in place. And there's also laws of human interaction with each other, and with Him, we call that the Torah. Those are the laws of how we are supposed to function in terms of loving each other and loving Him. It's very simple. And considering most things that we do in life, there's very few laws. If you go to try to do something like drive a car, there's way more than 613 laws. Anything that you want to do, there's more than 1,000 laws probably, at least. You know how many laws are related to the tax code? But yet, for you to keep the creator of the universe pleased, in other words, we want to do what's pleasing in His sight, the guesstimate by the Jewish community is that there are 613 of those. Now, you may not agree with that number, but whatever number you come up with is still going to be less than whatever the burdensome Caesar, Pharaoh, whatever you want to call the governments that we're under, what they try to impose on us. And by the way, if you get arrested or get in trouble and you say, well, I didn't know that was the law, well, ignorance of the law is no excuse. See, but with Yahweh, it's different. Yahweh says, I only expect you to do what you've been shown and revealed. But once I reveal it, then you have a much bigger thing. So instead of just getting a small penalty like, well, pay this fine for $50. You didn't realize you weren't supposed to park there or whatever. You didn't realize the speed limit changed. Oh, no. If you break His laws that you have been already had revealed to you, you're risking death, like forever death. It's a whole different thing. He expects you to do. So it's almost like, could you imagine if the government treated you differently with a law that they know you know? Well, I know you didn't know that. It's okay. It's only a $50 fine. Oh, but I knew you did know that? Well, then it's a $5,000 fine. That could be real burdensome and different. Because when you break the law knowing what the law is, that's different, isn't it? Okay, so this is what we're dealing with here. So the word is going out. They're assembling all the people. Listen, it's everybody, the men, the women, the little ones, even the ger, the sojourner. This is the proselyte, the one who's looking to join. Not just every stranger around, but the one who says, you know what, this looks interesting. I think I might want to be a part of this. That person should be there also so they know exactly what they're getting into. Isn't that essentially what James was saying, what Yaakov was saying in Acts, when he said in Acts 15, he says, look, in every place that they go in the synagogues, isn't Moses preached? So these people that are thinking of joining, they're going to go hear the law, they're going to hear the Torah, so they'll know what they're getting into. See, there was a group of people, and that's the only group of people we see in history, that had to make the decision having not known what they were getting into. But they had something you don't have. They had just witnessed the awesome power of Yahweh in a way that you don't see anywhere else in history. And so when they agreed, without even knowing what the agreement was, they already knew that it was who they were dealing with is why they said yes. what he'd already done to Egypt and for them. The rest of us were actually given you need to know what you're getting into so that you can make a choice. And that's what Yaakov was talking about in Acts 15. He says, don't worry about the Gentiles and this and that, and they have to circumcise before they learn anything and all this other stuff. Let them first figure out what they're getting into and if they really want to put themselves into that. Making decisions is the reason we're here. So Yaakov said, let them see what they're getting into and make a decision. So they go into it with their eyes open, and they know what they're doing. So they got to go hear Moses preached so that they understand what is the covenant. See, all of this is about covenant. These people who are covenanted are standing there, and they need to know what the Torah says because the Torah is the basis of the covenant. It's the details. You agreed to do what I say. I agree to take you as my people. Here are the details of what it is that I'm saying. I expect you not to steal, not to murder, not to make idols. All right, I expect you to keep the Shabbat, keep the feast. All the things, the do's and the don'ts, are all laid out in the Torah. So that's your covenant. So he wants everybody to be there, even the sojourners within your gates, so that they hear and that they learn to fear. Okay, they're going to fear Yahweh, your Elohim, and guard to do all the words of this Torah. So this is supposed to put that serious fear in them, and not just because they're hearing the laws, but part of it also is hearing the story. That should cause that awe and that reverence, to hear the account of the journey to this point. And that's why Deuteronomy starts out with that history lesson and tells you the journey and the story leading to the Jordan. And we have that same journey eventually leading to the promised land, which the Jordan was the type and shadow of. And so here we have all the people to hear. And he says, look, in verse 13, and their children who have not known it should hear and learn to fear Yahweh your Elohim, as long as you live in the land you are passing over the Jordan to possess. So everybody was to hear this so they could learn to have awe, respect, and reverence for their Creator, who gave them these great laws. Several places it talks about what other nation has such laws. What other nation has such a relationship with their Elohim? We have a relationship with the Elohim. And not the nations that are out there with 15 different ones and they really could care less which one was which. We have a relationship with the one and only. And he says, look, I would love to take you as my people, but this is what I expect. And by the way, what I expect is not burdensome. It's not hard. And actually will bring you blessing and make your life safer and will help transform you in your character. Wow, what a horrible dictator he is, huh? Giving us all these horrible things to do that are going to bless us, keep us safe, and change us into him. I think it's pretty awesome, quite frankly, but, that's just me maybe. So then he says, verse 14, he says, and Yahweh said to Moshe, see, the days have drawn near for you to die. Call Yehoshua and present yourselves in the tent of meeting so that I command him. And Moshe and Yehoshua went in and presented themselves in the tent of meeting. And Yahweh appeared at the tent in the column of cloud, and the column of cloud stood above the door of the tent. And Yahweh said to Moshe, see, you are about to sleep with your fathers, and this people shall rise and whore after the mighty ones of the strangers of the land into the midst of which they shall enter. And they shall forsake me and break my covenant, which I have made with them. Well, isn't that a nice howdy-do? They're about to cross over the Jordan to go get this thing started. He's already telling them they're going to mess this up. And here's Joshua going, great, this is what I inherit? I'm about to take over, and you're already telling me that they're going to mess up? And he already knows as the leader, he bears a certain amount of that responsibility. Just like Moses did every time the people messed up in the desert. And Joshua watched Moses have to go and get on his face before Yahweh and say, don't kill them, kill me. Somehow I must have failed that the people are behaving like they're behaving. I'll edit myself there. Okay? He says they're going to go after, listen, what is it always that it is? It's after the stuff that they see others doing. He calls it whoring. I don't think there's a person in this room, if I called you a whore, you'd be very happy. But he's actually saying they're going whoring. They're acting the whore. And that's really a label none of us wants. But what's causing the problem is that they're going after what they see the others around them doing, because it looks to you just like the thing with the fruit. It looks like it's good to eat. It's good, looks, the eyes appreciate it. It's good for the flesh. It's going to open my eyes and give me understanding. This is the same thing Chava was doing in the garden. Why are we looking out after other things, thinking somehow they're going to make life better or be the answer to something? He is the answer to everything. Get that into your head, get it into your heart, and walk on that path. But see, they're going to see people doing other things and go, well, that looks fun. Oh, that looks good. Oh, that seems to work. And look at how prospering they seem to be doing, all that prosperity. Maybe we should be doing what they're doing. He's saying, oh, no. He says, then my displeasure shall burn against them in that day, and I shall forsake them and hide my face from them, and they shall be consumed. And many evils and distresses shall come upon them, and it shall be said in that day, is it not because our Elohim is not in our midst that these evils have come upon us? Yes, they're probably going to figure out, as you have in your life, that there are times when the reason you're suffering is because he is not there with you. What you have to figure out is why. They figured out that he wasn't there, but it's not clear at this point that they figured out why he's not there. Because you chose a path that cuts yourself off. He didn't just decide, in a fickle sort of sense, well, I don't like you guys anymore, I'm going to pick another people. He says, you have forsaken him and broken his covenant, therefore he is going to forsake you and hide his face from you. We started the problem. We caused the problem by forsaking him. And so they rightly identify that this is because Elohim is not in our midst, but then what are they going to do next? In verse 18 it says, I shall certainly hide my face in that day because of all the evil which they have done, for they shall turn to other mighty ones. So instead of turning to him and realizing he's not in our midst, we need to turn to him and get him to come back in our midst. Really, it's you turning back to him more than him coming to you. When you don't feel he's around, it's probably because, not even probably, I guarantee it's because you moved, not because he moved. You went off the path. You turned left or right. You made a mistake in terms of where you were going. He says, and now write down this song for yourselves and teach it to the children of Israel. Put it in their mouths so that this song is to me for a witness against the children of Israel. So he wanted them to know that this was coming. And they actually had an opportunity to avoid this if they would have made decisions, but they didn't. He knows our hearts. Our hearts are still too self-sovereign, too selfish, too filled with craving and desires for this, that, and the other thing that you don't need, and actually will probably turn out to not even be good for you. Some of you know this experience because as a kid you did this. Some of you are still kids and you still might do this or have done this, but you started really craving something like, I don't know, cookies or ice cream or something that was just available to you, and you ate too much. Oh, it tasted good up to a point, but that craving had a price. And so we have to realize that that's the way it works in a universal sort of way. We can crave something that would be good for us in balance, but then out of balance causes harm. Now, the only thing you can't crave too much is seeking him with all your heart, with all your might, with all your being. That's the only thing that you can't overdo. So he says here, to write down the song, in verse 20, he says, and I shall bring them to the land flowing with milk and honey, of which I swore to their fathers, and they shall eat and be satisfied and be fat. Then they shall turn to other mighty ones, and they shall serve them and scorn me and break my covenant. Notice, they really weren't satisfied. He said they're going to eat and get fat and be satisfied and have all this abundance, and yet that's still not enough. So they're going to turn to other mighty ones instead of appreciating. The greatest thing that is causing all of our curses is that we don't appreciate. Whether it's the vertical relationship, you don't appreciate the things he gives us, the things he does for you, or you don't appreciate the opportunities he creates for you. But what about appreciating your children, your parents, your spouses, your friends, family members? We don't appreciate. Do you appreciate that you live in a country where we have indoor plumbing? We take that for granted. Refrigerators, stoves. There's a lot of places, believe it or not, that still don't have these things. But we whine and complain because we don't appreciate. So here, they were fat, they were satisfied. They breaking Deuteronomy 8, right, where it says, when you've eaten and you are satisfied, don't forget who gave you the power to create that abundance, that wealth. Well, that's exactly what he said they're going to do. They forgot, and they're going to turn to other mighty ones. And the turning to other mighty ones means you're going to seek your desires and your pleasures elsewhere. You know, when you read Psalm 119 and other things that David wrote, you can see that all he wanted to do was have everything that he could possibly be satisfied with be satisfied by Yahweh and Torah. That it would be the honey on his mouth, it would be the abundance of wealth like gold, that it would satisfy everything in him. And that his being only craved and desired that. That's the only safe thing to desire in that level. And we have to be careful with that. And by the way, when I say desire it on that level, I mean that means the fullness of it. It means that you have to still learn how to treat each other so that you can't be so focused on studying and learning Torah that you neglect your family, you neglect your job. Remember, it's the fullness of Torah we're talking about here, which is how you love each other and how you love him and finding that balance that he instructs us to have. Because you could become so totally book-focused and vertically focused and trying to study that you're actually not walking this out like you should. I mean, if your Torah knowledge is going up and there's no peace in your home, you're not doing it right. If your relationships are not where they need to be, you're not doing it right. Let's continue. He says, and I shall bring them into that place where they're satisfied and fat, and they shall turn to mighty ones, and they shall serve them and scorn me and break my covenant. Now, the scorning, I don't think we should be reading into this like necessarily a Peshat level. They're like actively going, that thing was no good. No, but when you choose something over him, you're showing him that you choose something above him. He sees that as scorning. There's other places we're not going to turn to them where we can see this play out very clearly, where he chooses to use the words like scorn or forsaken, and when it's not that you actively chose to forsake or scorn him, but because of your choices, that's actually what you've done. And you need to understand that, because you may think like, I would never scorn him. Well, when you make certain choices, by default, that's really what you're doing. That's how he sees it. He says, and it shall be, verse 21, when many evils and distresses come upon them, that this song shall answer before them as a witness. This is Yahweh's giant, I told you so. I warned you. He says, for it is not to be forgotten in the mouths of their seed, for I know their thoughts, which they are forming today, even before I bring them to the land of which I swore to give them. They were already planning what they were going to do in this land of abundance. Now, some of you are thinking, well, we don't have the song anymore. So well, yes, we do. It's not necessarily the words and the lyrics. That way we have the book with all the words in it. And so we're supposed to know these things and be aware of them and keep them as frontlets before our eyes so that we're aware that if we're not keeping it as frontlets before our eyes, we are likely to be subject to messing it up, to doing the things he warns us not to do if we don't keep it as a right in front of us awareness. So don't think, well, you know, we don't have the song. Well, we don't know what the music sounded like, but we have the words essentially. We've got the full story. We don't even have to go to the priest. We have the book right here. We've got you. Everybody has one. And if you don't have one, you've got it digitally or some other way, but you have one. I don't think there's anybody out there that doesn't have access to one. Continuing, let's see. 22, when Moses wrote this song the same day and taught it to the children of Israel, and he commanded Yehoshua, son of Nun, and said, be strong and courageous, for these people that you're about to mess with are crazy, and they're not going to listen, and they're going to mess this up. I'm sure he had that conversation at some point. He says, I'm done. They're yours now. He says, be strong and courageous, for you are to bring the children of Israel into the land of which I swore to them, and I myself am with you. And it came to be when Moses had completed writing the words of this Torah in a book until their completion, that Mosheh commanded the Levites who bore the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, saying, take this book of the Torah and place it beside the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, your Elohim, and it shall be there as a witness against you. See, now people read that witness against, and then they start into this whole Melchizedekian teaching that's out there, thinking that somehow these are laws that were against us and it's evil stuff. No, the witness is against you, saying, if you do this, you can't say, well, I didn't know. So it's not that it in itself is against you. It's there to be held as a standard for you to be measured against. And you can't say, but I didn't know. Because he says, no, you're supposed to know. I taught it to you. No excuses. For I myself know your rebellion and your stiff neck. See, while I am still alive with you today, you have been rebellious against Yahweh, then how much more after my death? Now remember, that idea of stiff neck always is referring to the inability to bow before an authority. See, we don't do that anymore. There are very few cultures that do any kind of bowing. Some of the Eastern cultures still do a little bit of that, but generally we don't give honor and respect by bowing ourselves to someone, saying, I respect your authority. And by the way, bowing, as we talked about it in What is Worship, doesn't mean that you are only to bow just to Yahweh. There's respect that you can show others that's appropriate, that's not worship. We see Jacob doing this with Esau. He lays prostrate before him. He bows before Esau. Nothing wrong with that. He didn't worship him as a Elohim, as creator. He's respecting his authority and honoring him. But we're stiff-necked. We don't want to bow our heads to anybody. Spouses, you have this problem. Employees, you have this problem. People within ministry, you have this problem. Anywhere there's an authority, you have this problem. It pops up on a regular basis. That stiffness in the neck. And by the way, the chiropractor can't fix this one. I don't care how many adjustments you get. Yahweh is a different type of chiropractor. He'll put you through some adjustments. And they won't be as gentle and pain-free as maybe what the chiropractor will do. But he's going to get that neck to loosen up. And you will not enjoy it. But look, he talks about it being self-sovereign, which essentially is rebellion. He calls it that. He says, you have been rebellious. Rebellious doesn't mean actively fomenting dissension and trying to go against. It simply means not submitting to. If you choose a different authority than the one you're supposed to be under, that's rebellion. And so you have to be careful about that. And that goes into all aspects of our lives. We run into leadership in all kinds of places, and we are rebellious in almost all of them. Assemble unto me all the elders of your tribes, verse 28, and your officers, so that I speak these words in their hearing and call the heavens and earth to witness against them. Basically saying, look, as long as you can see the heavens and the earth and they exist, this stuff is still valid. So now he's told the priests, and now he's told also the elders and the officers. These are the heads of the thousands, the hundreds, the fifties, the tens, etc. All the leadership. It says, for I know that after my death you shall do very corruptly and turn aside from the way which I've commanded you, and evil shall come to you in the latter days, because you do what is evil in the eyes of Yahweh, to provoke him through the works of your hands. Key phrase there is you're doing evil according to what? In the eyes of Yahweh. I'm going to say something you're not going to like probably. Your opinion doesn't count. That's just the facts. What matters is it evil in the eyes of Yahweh? Not evil in your eyes. Because you may say, well, I don't know what's so wrong with though that I did this or that, or I don't know what's so bad about that. Well, that doesn't matter what you think it is. Your opinion absolutely has no bearing here. There's only one opinion that matters, Yahweh's. That's what's said right there. And evil shall come to you in the latter days because you do what is evil in the eyes of Yahweh. You're probably not doing evil in your own eyes. Generally speaking, we don't. We're not evil people the way we normally would think of it. We're not overtly, openly trying to do what we would think of as evil. But that's according to your standards or your culture's standards where we live. But what about in the eyes of Yahweh? To provoke him through the works of your hands. In other words, we provoke him by the things we do. But we don't think we are because we use things like, well, he knows my heart. Well, yes, he does. And I don't know why you're not afraid of that. All these people use that phrase all the time. It's like, are you kidding me? I would never use that phrase because I already know that's true. And that's why I know I'm in trouble, because he knows my heart is to try to find a side direction or to wiggle around or spin something. That's my heart. Unless you're absolutely got your heart right and are just doing what he says. But if you're trying to justify, rationalize whatever you're doing, he knows your heart. And that's usually when I hear the phrase when somebody say to me, well, I know that's not right, but he knows my heart. What do you mean? That's like idiocy. You're doing you know what's wrong to do, but he knows my heart is that I love him and I really want to do what's right. Then why are you doing what you know is wrong? That's just crazy. Or I should say insanity, whatever the definition. That's insane. To do something wrong, know it's wrong, and somehow say, well, he knows my heart. Well, yeah, he knows your heart was to do what you wanted to do, which is why you justified it. So how is that helping anything? That's crazy. We are all crazy. As long as we're still sitting on the throne, we're crazy. To sit there, we are an out-of-control, insane dictator sitting on our throne. We are sovereigns who have lost our minds. Because he's shown us a better way, and we're being too stubborn to let him have his way. That's stupid. I'm sorry. Maybe sometimes I'm too blunt. Maybe I'm not blunt enough. We're just terminally stupid and foolish. I'm speaking to myself first. I make dumb mistakes just like the rest of you do. And why do we do that? Because our hearts are not right with him yet. Go back to 64 parts of the heart of the matter. That's the problem. He knows our hearts. What do we know about the hearts? It's desperately sick and can't be trusted. Jeremiah, right? 17:9. This is our heart, though. So Moses spoke in the hearing of all the assembly of Israel the words of this song till their completion. That's why I did Deuteronomy 31. We needed to know, we needed to understand that this is the way Yahweh plays it out. He gives his information to leaders. The leaders are then required and responsible for the dissemination of that information to the people who are now then required to adhere to it in that process. And then to validate that, which is why when I teach and other teachers teach, hopefully they're reading you mostly from the book and not just coming out of their own head, so that you're hearing the word and know whether or not it's true. By the way, you don't even need me to do it that way because you have it sitting in your lap and you're holding it in your hands and you have a book of your own. And you can go back and check and say, wait a minute, does it really say what he just said? And that's what you're required to do. And so this is how the covenant process works. It's not just the covenant of love each other, love him, but he has a process for how that information gets disseminated, how you get your guidance, how you get your questions answered, so that you know that you're doing it correctly, is that there's a structure. Problem is, the structure has been wasted, destroyed, neglected, abused, whatever, done away with, mishandled. I mean, every bad thing you can think of has happened to the structure. And so we're trying to encourage people to go and find that structure, and those that would be willing to stand and take the opportunity for the double judgment to be a part of that structure, if you are actually called and anointed to do so. By the way, when we go back into chapter 31, it says here that Yahweh tells Moses to bring in Yehoshua. Now, we know earlier on, there's a selection of Joshua as the next going. So if you notice, it's the one anointed appointed, then selects the next one. In this case, Yahweh is involved in that selection, and that is then passed from one to the other. We don't see any self-anointing, self-appointing going on here. And so that's our big problem in the body, all the self-anointed, self-appointeds. Now, there may be some out there that Yahweh appoints directly. but you got to vet them out. The fruit will show you. The fruit will show you. I mean, in this case, it was easy. It starts with Moses. Whatever happened before, we know at this point, after they come out of Egypt, it all starts with Moshe. And Moshe then passes that on to the 70 elders, and he puts Joshua in charge of everything. And from there, it goes forward. But are we going to accept that reality? Or are we going to listen to all the bashing that's out there about leadership and structure and how, oh no, we're not supposed to be organized and we're not supposed to go meet in buildings? I don't know. It says in Acts that they go to the synagogue on the Sabbath and hear Moses preached. Nobody said, shame on you for meeting in synagogues. In other words, organized buildings. Yes, some of the people met in houses when there wasn't a building to go to. Oh, but we've been abused in buildings and organized structures before, so therefore the system must be the problem. We'll throw it out. So nobody should ever get married, because that clearly doesn't work. More than half the people end up in divorce. And nobody should have children, because we know that doesn't always work. I mean, let's just throw out everything because it doesn't work right. Even though we know that's the way it was created to be, just because we haven't figured out how to do it right doesn't mean it is wrong. We are wrong in how we implement it. The system, the structure is not the problem. You see it in Scripture all the time. And he says, when you implement it right, it will go well. When you implement it wrong, it will go badly. We have a king coming. He's going to be the best, most perfect king there ever was or ever will be. But you know what? In Israel's history, they had some really good kings. And guess what? When they had good kings, things went really, really well. And I don't mean good from a secular point of view. The ones that were Torah submissive, Torah observance, guarding the commands and teaching the people to be in line with that as well. Those kingdoms prospered, and so did all of their people. If you do a study through the history, you'll see it was almost like every other king. It was either a really good one or really awful. Weren't too many mediocre ones. They were either doing what Yahweh said or they're doing whatever they wanted. You see this over and over and over again in a cycle. So what do? We look at it and say, well, the whole thing, the system was the problem. Well, actually, the system was fine until people said, I want a king. They had priests and elders. They didn't need a king. They already had leadership in a vertical structure. There always was still a head there. And by the way, when you see a king, there's always what in addition to the king? What always was there in addition to the king? A prophet. Who really had the authority? The prophet. We see that very clearly when Saul starts messing up, and the prophet shows up, and Samuel is not happy. So who really had authority and power in that relationship? When Saul didn't listen to what Samuel said, wasn't he in trouble? He said, why did you do this? You didn't wait for me. Why do I still hear the bleating of sheep? Right? When Nathan was with David, who really was the power? Let's remember, the prophet. So they had a structure until they said, we want a king like everybody else. All right. He said, fine, I'll give you what you want. But be careful what you ask for. It may not go as well as you like. You see, because when you deal with a prophet, you're dealing with an anointed, appointed. When you're dealing with a king, you're dealing with someone who's appointed, anointed by the prophet, but a lot of it then goes generationally just to children. So just because David was anointed didn't mean his children were all going to be anointed. Remember, there was a disconnect from Saul to David. It wasn't lineage from father to son. So just because David was anointed doesn't mean every single one of his children were, as they keep going generationally down through, his grandchildren, great-grandchildren, etc. But they were following in a lineage based on a worldly structure where the kings generally followed line by birth, generally. And so when you have that by birth, that doesn't mean that they were actually anointed and appointed. They were there by default to some degree. Now, some of them had a better level of anointing and appointing, like you see that with Hezekiah. There was a good, righteous king. But you don't see that with all of them. You see some really bad ones. Look at Ahab. Okay? You have some really bad ones. So the structure was fine until the people decided to mess with the structure. And notice that it goes back to what we see here where he says, you're going to travel through these lands and you're going to get all in trouble because you're going to want what they have. What did they say? We want a king like everybody else. Why do you need a king? This thing has already been working just fine without a king. Of course, Moses was accused of trying to be a king. Oh, Moses, who put you in charge that you're like the king over us? There was a structure. There needs to be a structure. And because we wanted a king and messed that all up, guess what? A real king is coming. And this king is coming with a rod of iron, and he will have his will imposed on everyone. And it won't go well for a lot of people who just don't want to accept that. It's going to take a little while. We'd like to think that Yeshua shows up and everybody goes, yay! It's not going to work like that. Only some of us are going to get excited about that. There's still going to be nations that refuse to come down for Feast of Tabernacles, and the plagues of Egypt are going to be put on them, like it says in the Scripture. There's still going to be those. It's amazing to think that, but we are so self-sovereign, it doesn't matter that it's Yeshua himself in full embodiment, literally here. Our self-sovereignty is just too stubborn to give up that authority. We do not want to give up that authority and that power. And until we figure that out, we are not going to get this right. And we have all this time now, hopefully, to practice so that we're ready for this. Let's go to Joshua chapter 3. This is the thing I mentioned last week that I thought we might get some interesting things out of. Let's see what happens when I start reading it. Joshua chapter 3, and we're going to read a couple of verses, just not the whole chapter, just 3 or 4 verses. And Yehoshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and they stayed there before they passed over. And it came to be after 3 days that the officers went into the midst of the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, this is the interesting verse, when you see the ark of the covenant of Yahweh your Elohim, and the priest, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. Only keep a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near so that you know which way to go, for you have not passed over this way before. That's real. So there's really some interesting things here, I think, in this verse 3 and 4. Okay, so he says, when you see the Ark of the Covenant. So this goes back to having eyes to see, ears to hear, I think. You've got to see it. You've got to see it for what it is. You've got to know what it is. When you see that covenant, when you see the ark bearing that covenant, when you see it for what it is, this is my interpretation, okay? And you can see it, and you know it, and you understand, and you go, I know what that is, and I see it. He says, and you see the leadership, and you see them and recognize them, the priests, the Levites, who have the burden of bearing it. And you're recognizing and seeing these things for what they are, then you're going to go out and follow it. You need to see it, recognize the people involved in their roles with it, and then you go forward and set out and follow it. But you're following it, you're also following the leadership because they're bearing it, this covenant. It's making sense for people. This verse was so powerful when I read it. That part, this isn't the part that I wasn't sure where we were going to go. It's the last piece he says, but then he says, only keep a distance between you and it. Why? Why do we keep a distance? He does explain it to some degree. He says, do not come near it so that you know which way to go. See, I think what happens is if you get too close to it, the likelihood is one of two things. Either A, you're going to go in front of it, and now you're not following anymore. Or you get so close, you think that now you're one of those leaders who gets to decide how things go. And you start to want to manipulate it. See, that's what I'm thinking. That was the piece I wasn't sure how that was going to come out today, but that's what I'm thinking at this point has to do with why do you have to keep behind it? So that you keep your distance of respect, awe, and reverence, for that is in front and I am back here. I'm not equal to it. I'm not above it. I shouldn't be in front of it. I don't deserve or to be even next to it. I need to follow it. If I see it and understand and recognize what it is, and I recognize those whose burden it is to bear it, then I need to set out and follow it, but I need to keep a respectful distance. See, a lot of us have this problem in the congregation, not necessarily just this one, any congregation, where we don't keep the appropriate distance of respect and awe and reverence for the person who's in charge, whose job it is to bear that burden. But no, we want to get right up there and tell them how wrong they are and they don't know what they're talking about, and grab the book out of their hand and start showing them what they need to be doing. Could that be part of what's going on here? Why there needs to be a distance? Not a distance like, I am above you and you're above. No, they have a burden, a serving. They've given their lives as servants to you and to serve the Almighty in this burden of Torah. So it's not that you look up to them like, oh, they're better or this or that or the other thing. It's simply understanding they've got a burden. You need not interfere with it. Maybe that's really the point. And again, I said once we got here, I wouldn't know what was going to come out. But I think that's maybe part of the point there, is that if you get too close, your tendency would be to interfere and get your fingers into the thing and start meddling with it. Oh, this happens in congregations all the time. So I think that's a really important piece that we have right here when he says, look, when you see the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, your Elohim, so you recognize that is of Yahweh. And you see and recognize those whose job and burden it is to bear that which is Yahweh's. You are to set out and follow that. But you're following it at a distance so that you won't be tempted to control it, grab a hold of it, usurp it, lead it, misdirect it. You understand what I'm saying now? That's why I think he says keep a distance. Not that you are keeping a distance from the information and the relationship that's being taught there. You're just keeping a respectful distance from those whose job it is to do certain things with it and what's not your job. You are to have an intimate, deep relationship with the Torah, with the covenant, with what's in that ark. You don't have to be up there in front to have that relationship. The priests don't have more of a relationship than you do, so to speak. But they have a job to do that if you get too close, you may mess with that job. You may cause a derailment of that job. You may interfere with the doing of that job. Does that make sense? Now again, when I told you this last week, I had no idea where this was going to go, but I like where it's going. I think that actually clearly gets into what I think is being said here. Because he says, look, do not come near it so that you know which way to go. Because if you come too close, guess what? You're no longer going to know which way to go. You're going to start deciding to influence which way to go. Because now you're up in the driver's seat. You're up in the front of the car. And now you think that you should be able to say, no, let's go this way. But if the leader's way up in front of you and you don't have a choice, 2,000 cubits, that's a good distance so that you're not even like yelling for them, hey, listen, I think we should go that way. You have to yell pretty loud. It's a good distance. It says, and also you're trusting, I'm just adding this here, I just feel like this goes in, you're also trusting to allow that to be in front. You don't have to feel like you have to do it yourself or manipulate the situation or go on your own strength. You're allowing Yahweh to be in front and lead and allowing the leadership that the burden is to bear it, to carry it in front so that things can go good, so things can go well. Right? A lot of verses talk about, so it would be well with you. So let's maybe really embrace this piece of it because I think that first we have to see the ark. Can we see it? Can we understand that it's for us? Embrace that. And do not think for a second that being 2,000 cubits away lessens your relationship or diminishes it in any way. It doesn't. It protects you from making mistakes in terms of your involvement of doing something you were not called to do, interfering with what Yahweh's already put in place. It protects you from that. And then he says, look, when you recognize that, then you have to recognize the leadership whose burden it is. So step one, you recognize the covenant and the ark. Step two, you recognize there are those who have the burden. That's their responsibility to bear that burden, and you're then to go out and follow them carrying the burden. The ark isn't just floating in the air and everybody's following the ark. The leadership has the burden of holding on, carrying it, and going wherever they're supposed to go. And you need to trust that that anointed, appointed leadership knows where they're going, that they're being guided and led to go where they're going. And then you are to set out from that place and follow it. So from that place means from your place of not recognizing the ark, your place of not knowing who leadership is. When you see the ark and you see the covenant and you see the leadership and you recognize them for what they are, then you're to leave that place of where you were in your confusion, self-sovereignty, whatever it was, and get up and follow. But the problem is a lot of you want to follow up to a point, but then you want to send your backseat driving influence. I get emails every day of people trying to tell me what I'm doing wrong and how I need to fix it and how I need to change and where I need to go and we need to do it this way, not that way, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm not trying to mock that. I just don't know why you're sending it to me. I feel I'm anointed and called. I'm going where I think he wants me to go, and he's not going to use you necessarily to tell me I'm doing it wrong. That's not the way it works. Now, by the way, it doesn't mean that I'm never wrong. It just means that that's just not the way it works. You're not supposed to be trying to jump in the front seat telling me where to go and how to drive. I can't tell you how many people have sent me emails telling me that we're doing the feast wrong because the new moon wasn't sighted the way they think it should be sighted on the day that they thought it should be sighted, and so therefore all our days are wrong. And they haven't had enough respect to go listen to the teaching it explains why we're doing it the way we do and why I made that decision and why I feel it's the right decision. Now, you don't have to agree with it, but that's what I felt led to do. That's the inspiration and guidance I was given. And I don't need then people, and I'm not picking on you, I don't need people then just call me up, email me and everything else to tell me how I got it wrong. And they say it in a way like as if I didn't know. Oh, by the way, you might not know this, but the new moon didn't fall, blah, 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 blah. I'm aware. I know all the different calendars that are out there and how they're playing through. I know when the Hillel calendar actually falls right on some of the other calendars and when it doesn't. And there's been some times when it's nailed the other calendars dead on. Actually, often. But I have reasons why we picked this calendar. And you're telling me that we have the dates wrong because the moon didn't fall right is not going to change my reasons. But do you respect that you see the covenant, you see the ark, and you see the anointed, appointed people that you're supposed to be looking for, those fivefold guys? If you recognize that, let them do their job. Don't jump up there, keep your distance. Don't try to drive the bus or redirect them or push them out of the driver's seat. If they really are off in the wrong direction, then you've actually maybe found yourself someone who isn't the person you're supposed to be with. Go find somebody else. And if you're always the one thinking everybody's wrong, then why don't you grab a microphone and lead and see how fun it is? As a matter of fact, that should be the rule. If you want anybody out there who wants to correct me or any of the other leadership, I want to see your teaching. Don't just tell me I'm wrong. I want your teaching. And I want your teaching not just in like 47 pages of an email. Go record a teaching that you put out in public to show why you're so right. And then allow the public to criticize you. Because, oh, it's so easy to sit in the cheap seats and throw the tomatoes. Where's your teaching? Where are you putting yourself out to let people judge you and criticize you? Oh, and by the way, you only will tell me about your one issue, the calendar, whatever it is. What about all the other things in your life that may be completely upside down and backwards? Are you going to allow that to be out in public? See, I have in public almost everything I believe about everything. It's in the 300 teachings on the website, or whatever there is out there. There's 1,000 videos. So you know what I believe about everything. I don't know what you believe about anything except the one little thing you email me about. And try to tell me how wrong I am, as if I don't know that I made a decision different than the one you want me to make. I know when the moons fall. I know when they're seen here and in Jerusalem. And I explained in my teaching that I shared in public why I made the choice I made. You go get yourself a group and make your own choice. You don't like my choice. That's fine. I don't care. And trust me, if you know me, you know I don't care. You're welcome to go start your own thing and do your own thing and whatever. That's fine. I'm not going to judge it, attack it, or tell you you're wrong. That's not my job to do. But I love you guys. You all think that you're going to, you need to correct us. okay, because you have your personal ministry of corrections. You have to contact every ministry there is out there and tell them how wrong they are. And you got to post on every YouTube video how wrong they are. I'm like, really? Who anointed you to do that? Where's that in Scripture? But this is what we have. Only keep a distance between you and it. Do not come near it so that you know which way to go, for you've not passed over this way before. That's the other piece of it. If you've gone someplace once or more than once, you kind of know how to get there, don't you? Some of you have never really been to this building until recently, but now that you've been here once or twice, it's not a problem not remembering how to get here. Once you know the way, you've been there. Well, guess what? How many of you have been Torah observant your whole lives, and you've been here before and you know which way you're going? Anybody? No, you haven't been this way before. Guess what? That's talking to you. Do not come near it so that you know which way to go, because you have not passed over this way before. That's why we get thousands and thousands of questions about Torah observance all the time. Is this what this means? Is that what that means? How do I do this? How do I do that? Is this the right way? Is this the wrong way? Why do people ask all these questions? Because they don't know. Because they've not been this way before. And the Ruach, I'm sorry to tell you, is not at fault here. The Ruach is not supposed to be, and it never was supposed to be, just opening your eyes and ears to every single thing you need to know instantly when you need it. Because that's not the structure of Scriptures. Yahweh could have, at Sinai, said, you don't need any leadership. I'm just going to talk to every individual personally from now on. Couldn't he? He certainly could have, but did he? No. He put in place Torah teachers and leadership. Why? Because his whole structure is a leadership structure. There's the Father, then the Son. The Son will be king over everything, and then there's us. We have to understand structure. Yeshua understood it very clearly. What did he say often? He said things like, my Father is greater than I. I only do everything my Father says to do, and there's nothing he says to do that I don't do. And there's nothing I do that he doesn't want me to do. I am completely submissive to authority. We get to practice that. Oh, but we don't like that stiff-neck problem. But that's the covenant, though. The covenant is you agree to do everything he says. Well, part of what he says is that there's supposed to be the structure in place. Oh, but the structure's been so bad. That's true. Find some good structure. It's out there. Has to be. Paul says so. You don't believe Paul? That's fine. He says that fivefold leadership structure would be available until we all come into the unity and conformity of the image of the Son, and we're not there yet. So unless Paul's wrong and lying and not under inspiration at that point, he's got to be right then, and it's got to be available to us somewhere. Now, you may just be too lazy to go look for it. And I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just being truthful. You may not have these things readily available where you are. It may not be in the local church. As a matter of fact, it probably isn't. You know, the average church on the corner is not teaching you what these fivefold guys are supposed to be doing. You're going to have to look and spend time and listen and vet. But when you see the covenant and you see that leadership in place of the people who are bearing the covenant, then you are to set out and follow it and keep your distance so that you don't meddle with and mess the deal up for yourself. I believe that's what's going on in these two verses. Anyway, that's what hit me when I was pulling it out. And the thing that hadn't been clear was the why. Why do we keep our distance? But it really became clear in the understanding of because you don't know which way to go because you haven't gone this way before. And if you get up in the front, your tendency is to get in front. Anybody do that with people? I have this happen on a regular basis. I'm walking with a group of people. I know where I'm going. They don't. And I find them walking past me. I was like, but you don't even know where you're going. Why are you walking past me? Or I have people where I'm walking because I tend to walk fast. I'll start walking past them and realizing, wait a minute, but I don't even know where I'm going. This happens to me almost all the time when I walk into a dentist office or a chiropractor or any of those offices where they got lots of rooms, and then the person will sort of let you in through the door, and then I'll start walking, and I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know which room we're going to. I have to think and stop and let them get in front because I don't actually know where I'm going. And so you have to actually get yourself to stop and allow them to lead and get a distance there. Because when two are walking together, and nobody's sure who's leading, they can end up going whichever one tends to get in front and pull off in the direction or whatever. And also you forget the level of influence you may have over somebody. Because some of you are very strong in your personalities and or just because of your relationship with somebody, you have a lot of influence. So they're just going to allow you to lead as soon as you get up there. Even though they really shouldn't be, because they really don't have any idea where they're going in this particular scenario. Other scenarios, maybe they should be in front because they do understand. But you have to know where you should be leading and where you should be following. But keep your distance appropriately. And that doesn't mean keep your distance in terms of having a friendship and relationship. It's talking about in the process of bearing the Ark of the Covenant and disseminating the information as to which way to go. That's where you keep the distance and allow them to do their job. This is the key piece here. That doesn't mean that they're being elevated and should be treated on a pedestal or any of that stuff. No. They're still the normal people doing their normal jobs, the priests doing their jobs of looking at your house to see if it has something on it or growth on your skin and all these other. There's relationships that are there. But when it comes to bearing the covenant and the ark and telling you which way to go, you need to keep a distance. Otherwise, you could end up someplace you shouldn't end up. That is the key. He says, because you don't know where to go. Only keep a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, because this is so that you know which way to go. You need to see it in front so you can follow it. Anybody been two people walking somewhere and each one thought the other one was leading and you thought you were following each other and you're just kind of going and you had no idea where you're going? That'll happen. And you look at each other like, I was following you. No, I was following you. I thought you knew where you're going. No, I thought you knew where you're going. Find someone who knows where they're going, let them lead, and follow. But you have to do your part. The part starts off with, when you see. Ask Father to reveal to you the ark and the covenant and who's bearing it. Ask him to reveal these things to you. That's what you need to be praying about. And then when you have it revealed to you, then you need to get in there behind it and follow it. All right, so I just wanted to cover that. Wow, that didn't really put us past this, which that's pretty good, though. We'll kind of stop right there, okay? Let's go ahead and pray. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Father, we come before you, and we're asking you to reveal, not only reveal you and your Son and your Torah, but so that we can see and know that we're seeing the ark, those that are bearing the covenant, and that, Father, those that are bearing it could take their responsibilities genuinely, knowing the double judgment that they could face. Because we've had a lot of people that were in those positions. We see that throughout Scripture. Lots of priests, lots of Levites, lots of elders, lots of leaders, all anointed and appointed and still going in the wrong direction at some point. Father, all of us have to find our roles and try to do them in the fear of you, the mighty Elohim, with reverence and awe, and without a stiff neck, but submissive and pliable in your hands, the master potter, to be made into the image of Yeshua. So, Father, we come before you now just appreciating so much what you're showing us about covenant and what it means to be a part of the covenant, what it means to be your people who are covenanted and what that looks like, and in seeking to do things that are pleasing in your sight and not doing what is evil in your sight, and to embrace that you have a process and a way and a structure that you have chosen, whether we like it or not. It's your way, and we then have to accept it's right. And so, Father, we thank you. We praise you. We submit ourselves to you and give you all glory and honor in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah, our soon-coming King. Amen. Amen.